What up friends, I'm James, your host, and today I'm going to be reviewing the new Sadistik album, Haunted Gardens. Spooky. This is the newest album by the underground rapper Sadistik, and he's always willing to try new styles. Haunted Gardens sees him taking influence from all of his prior work while adding a new and sort of macabre spin on things. The two intro tracks are fairly short, with dense and brief wordplay mainly used to set the tone of the actual record. These songs, as well as the entire album, take influence from a lot of his prior works. The themes and imagery of death, images, and feeling lost really pervade these tracks. They symbolize his depression and establish his headspace, along with the very melancholy and spacey production. This one in particular, the entire album, it's a very haunting and hollow sort of feel overall. 8.5 is a favorite of mine, with a bit of a combination of lo-fi alternative vibes in the beat. It's also fairly hollow as well. This matches the lyrics in how Sadistik is wondering how people end up the way that they are about their upbringing, and why he only focuses on the negative when other people can actually see positives in him. I especially like the Dark Souls reference about the hollowing, and I think it's a clever way to represent being cut off from communication to the point of feeling hollow and empty. Daisies is another favorite of mine, and this follows a trend of most of the songs on this album where they're largely hookless. It's just a more sinister, dark poetry sort of style. It's very fitting to his sort of stream of consciousness delivery on this album, and the sturdier trap beats along with the haunting sample blends incredibly well with those strings that are going on in the background too. The distorted tone on the vocals especially really add this dire emphasis, and it exemplifies the confusion and cry for help in the lyrics. Sadistik in this track knows that he can't let depression control him, but it's just not that easy to overcome it. Now we get to Man's Best Friend, and while I do like this song lyrically, I feel like this is an example of some of these songs feeling a bit underdeveloped. The sampled hook is nice, but the deep and echoing beat don't really do enough to fill the void, and especially when the sample is absent as well. When you take away that sampled hook, there's not really much going on in the background. I also feel that the second verse is a lot more interesting than the first verse is, though it almost feels like it should belong in a different song, as many elements come in here that don't really have anything to do in the first half. It makes the song feel a bit disjointed overall. Alcoves and Koi are also two more naturalistic and lo-fi sounding tracks. Alcoves is probably the most underwhelming song on the album for me. It's definitely more atmospheric. It's trying to be the sort of ominous atmospheric song, but it needs more of a backbeat presence to it. The voice recordings do a decent job at setting up the tone and atmosphere, but it just doesn't have much going on aside from that. Koi in particular has this kind of old western campfire vibe to it. I actually do like it a lot. It's kind of this quaint sounding song in the middle of all these really heavy-handed instrumentals, but the lyrics on this one I think are really nice. They talk about his dad and how his death has impacted Sadistik's life. I really like how he's sort of bringing nature into the lyrics as well, how he sees his dad in different aspects of nature. And while the song doesn't demand too much attention, it's nice and emotional, and I think it's a good transition song when going from these more heavy-handed instrumentals. We get this sort of lighter, simplistic vibe while still keeping the theme with the lyrics, and then we go back into the heavy-handed instrumentation again. Unfortunately though, Coles is not that interesting to me either. Lyrically, there are some cool metaphors featuring different types of flowers, but the beat itself is pretty stagnant, and it just doesn't match the sort of wordplay that Sadistik is displaying here, I feel. The hook is also a bit too simple, and it's honestly a bit of a letdown, especially when so few songs actually have hooks on this album. I feel like you need to give them a bit of a punch, but that just never comes here. However, after this one, we get the two heavy hitters, I think, on this album. The first of which is Sistine Chapel. The excellent church organ sample really sets this somber mood, and I like the lyrical wordplay with various references across different gods from different religions, and it's a very witty and artistic way to explain how this person he's talking about really makes him feel better, how he's just infatuated by this person. The hook itself is one of the best on the entire album, with his vocals and the female vocals bouncing off each other, and the beat also takes a deep, very heavy turn when the hook comes on as well. You can kind of sense that weight's just falling on top of you. It's really nice. The drums coming in on the second verse is also a pretty impactful touch that really rounds the song off overall. I also really like the way it leads into the next song, Gallow's Hill. The outro fades and then we get these electronic and eerie synths to bring us into this one, because it's gonna be good. Gallow's Hill is very reminiscent of his ultraviolet sound. Sadistik's flow is smooth as hell, and he has a lot of different flows over the same beat to keep things interesting and fresh. There's another fantastic hook on this track, and while it is obviously a reference to the Salem witch trials, it also seems to say how if you're a hollow person and you've lived in a bubble, you'll float, but if you've had real experiences like joy and sorrow and hardship, blah blah blah, you'll sink like the witch. However, this means that you're a person and that you've lived. It's kind of dealing with this sort of cruel irony in a way, which I think is very interesting and fitting for the record. Near the end of the album, Saints is basically Sadistik possibly seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The opening synth combined with the piano and strings is honestly a pretty beautiful moment on the song. This is especially reinforced by the lyrics where he starts to talk about seeing grays lighter and starting to see color again. It really highlights the sort of relief that he's feeling. I like how the hook describes how everyone deals with struggle, but how you deal with it and react to it is what's important. Like the line, "None of us are saints, but some of us ain't." The strings in the second verse are just captivating, honestly, and along with the flow switch to emphasize the lyrics here, it just culminates into such a climax that I think is probably one of the best moments on the album. Overall, this album is a pretty nice mesh of sounds in Sadistik's discography. Though it takes influences from many different places, it stands out in having its own sound and structure too. The structural style he chose can work against him though, with the poem-esque focus on verses without hooks can make songs seem a bit empty or make them have this sort of choppy, sudden flow to them. Some of the songs also seem a bit underdeveloped, while some were clearly destined to be in the spotlight more, or at least had their ideas more fleshed out overall. Still though, the lyrics and the overarching tone and imagery and sound really do bring this album home. I'm feeling a strong 7 on this one. I think it was pretty good. So now we have to talk about the album cover, of course, and this one is very typical with Sadistik. It's kind of this sort of a bit edgy, a bit haunting sort of atmosphere going on. I really like the color choice with the teal. I think that was a really nice touch. I feel like for the model on the cover, they might have wanted to focus in on her face more, like zoom in towards maybe like shoulder up. I think that would complete the frame a bit more and also bring more emphasis to the lyrics, which are more mental than they are physical, because with the cover I'm sensing this more like physical darkness, but with the lyrics on the record it feels more of like a mental darkness, so I think bringing attention to the face would have been a better choice here. But overall, I think the album cover it's alright. It's pretty consistent with his past work. You can tell it's Sadistik. But that is my opinion on Sadistik's Haunted Gardens. What did you think about this album? Was it as haunting and spooky as you thought it was gonna be? Let me know. What does that even mean? But until the next one, farewell.